Most of you remember the earthquake in Haiti 7 years ago, the one that killed thousands of people. And in the days that followed that terrible tragedy, rescuers spent weeks searching for survivors. And in the rubble, 12 days after the earthquake, a rescue squad found an American foreign aid worker hanging on for dear life. And when they pulled him from the debris, the worker was weak and he was dehydrated from a lack of nourishment, but miraculously, he had no major injuries. And in the days after his rescue, during his recovery, reporters who were amazed that he had survived underneath all that rubble without food, without water, without any major injuries, flocked to his bedside to interview him. And the question that he heard more than any other was, how? How did you do it? How did you hang on for so long? And here was his answer. It was so dark and it was so quiet underneath the rocks and the building materials and the rubble that at times it felt like I was going to be suffocated. But not long after I found myself under this pile of debris, I discovered a small pinhole ray of light coming through, and I wasn't sure how deeply I was buried, and I wasn't sure how much oxygen I had left, and I had no idea where I was, but I had that ray of light. I just kept focusing on that ray of light, and as long as I could see it, I knew there was hope. It's amazing how much hope light brings when we're surrounded by darkness. Amen? Nearly 3,000 years ago in the ancient Near East, the people of Israel had wandered far from God. The culture wasn't really that much different from the one that we're living in today. I mean, people were searching for happiness and they were looking for contentment, and in their search, they had chased after all kinds of the wrong things. They were worshiping all kinds of false gods in hope that these gods could meet the needs that they had. They were finding happiness or trying to find happiness in money and power and sex and pleasure, all the things that our culture chases after in search of happiness and fulfillment. And as a result, the world around them was in decay. Total and complete chaos. People were dying at the hands of their own neighbors and their families because of their greed and their selfishness. The moral decline led to disease and destruction like the people had never seen. For their own gain, they were entering into relationships and partnerships and treaties with foreign powers for protection, and those relationships led to their demise. It was a dark time in a desperate world. Sounds familiar, doesn't it, church? Look around you. Watch the nightly news, read the newspaper. I mean, the good news is nowhere to be found because it's buried behind the news of murders and war and natural disaster and social and political corruption and scandal. I mean, the stuff that for some demented reason our culture is drawn to. That's the news. And it's dark, much like it was 3,000 years ago. And into that dark place came a guy named Isaiah. Isaiah was an odd guy, to say the least, a guy who lived in the wilderness and pretty much kept to himself, a guy who wasn't afraid to speak his mind about pretty much anything, no matter the consequence to himself or to anybody else. Isaiah came onto the scene, and it wasn't long until the people recognized him for who he was, a prophet, except they didn't like prophets. Prophets came with a message that was hard, and it was painful, and it was scary, and Isaiah was no different. He came to tell the people that they were headed for trouble, that all the stuff that they were doing, all the ways that they were living their lives were going to lead to nothing but their destruction. But there was more to his message than that. Listen again to the opening verse of Isaiah chapter 9. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light, and on those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has come. It's amazing how much hope light brings when we're surrounded by darkness. Amen. The future looked pretty bleak for the people of Israel, and honestly, most of you would say that probably the future looks kind of bleak for us in the world that we live in too, doesn't it? I mean, in the pitch black darkness around us, it seems like there's not a lot of hope. But here's the good news, church. Into that pitch black darkness, a light is coming. Amen? Not only is a light coming, but a light has come. And it's amazing how much hope light brings when we're surrounded by darkness. This morning, we're celebrating Christmas, and Christmas is all about the light. Turn to your neighbor and say, it's all about the light. Yeah. It's why, whether they know it or not, the houses all around us are adorned with lights. It's why almost every Christmas Eve service that you have ever been to in your life is a candlelight service, because at its core, Christmas is about the light. The light of the world that burst forth into the darkness and destroyed its lasting power forever. Jesus' friend John told the story as we heard it just a few minutes ago. And he said it like this. He said, the Word gave life, say life, to everything that was created, and His life brought light. Somebody say light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. Amen? That's exciting, church, because it's amazing how much hope light brings when we're surrounded by darkness. Now, most of us have patches of darkness in our lives, don't we? I mean, for some of us, it's been a tough year financially. We lost a job, we ran into some hard times along the way, or you're behind on your rent, or health care costs are just skyrocketing and it's killing your savings, or whatever's going on. Here's what you need to know. A light has come to shatter your darkness. For some of us, it's been a rough year where our relationships were concerned. Our spouse or our significant other, we've had all kinds of trouble with them. Or our kids are driving us crazy. Somebody say amen. Or kids, your parents are on your back all the time. Somebody say amen. Right? Or maybe somebody you lost, somebody you love was lost along the way. Whatever the case, you need to know this. A light has come to shatter the darkness. For some of you, you've been struggling with some sin in your life or some habit that you can't seem to shake. Some of you maybe are struggling with addiction today, addiction to drugs or alcohol or food or pornography or gambling or shopping or whatever it is. Or maybe some of you are really trying to forgive somebody and you haven't really figured out how to do it. Or maybe there's something more subtly destructive going on in your life, like gossip and jealousy and lying, and you've wrestled with it and you've tried to overcome it, or maybe you haven't because you've become so comfortable with it and it's become who you are that you didn't know how to let it go. Whatever the case, you need to know this. The light has come to shatter your darkness. Amen? It's amazing how much hope light brings when you're surrounded by darkness. When you're surrounded by darkness, light does all kinds of great things. First of all, it points the way out. When you're surrounded by darkness, light points the way out. You've probably no doubt heard the expression, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. What does that mean to you when you hear it? What it means to me when I hear it is that the end is coming, right? That I got something to look forward to, that I'm not going to be stuck where I am forever. When Jesus came, it was a fulfillment of God's promise that the darkness is coming to an end, that we're almost through that tunnel. That light is perfect analogy for Jesus in this sense, because in Jesus we find the way out. Amen? In Jesus we find the way out. We find the way out of darkness. We find the way out of sin. We find the way out of bondage. We find the way out of shame. We find the way out of guilt, because Jesus is the way out. Amen? He illumines. He shines bright. He is there so that we can see the way out. He points the way because, as John says, Jesus is the way. Amen? When we're surrounded by darkness, light points the way out. But it also gives us strength. Turn to your neighbor and say, it gives me strength. When I'm surrounded by darkness, light gives me strength. It's a scientific fact that sunlight, that natural light, is absorbed by the body to produce vitamin D, which is a substance that's necessary for strengthening your bones. Did you know that? And maybe some of you have been around somebody, or you are somebody yourself who suffers from seasonal affective disorder or something like depression. And do you know what the treatment is for that? It's light, right? It's really that simple. That's the kind of power that light has, church. It gives strength when your strength is gone. The light of the world, Jesus, does the same thing. He gives strength where there is no strength. He offers rest for those who are weary so that they can make it through whatever they're facing. He empowers you for the road ahead. He brings healing and wholeness, and He carries you when you can't take another step. The light of the world gives you strength when you've got nothing left. When you're surrounded by darkness, light points the way out. Light gives you strength, but it also brings peace. When you're surrounded by darkness, light brings peace. You've probably been afraid of the dark at one point or another in your life. Almost everybody has, right? Do you remember how that felt? For me, it was an awful experience. When I was in junior high, my brother and I got into a knockdown, drag-out fight, as brothers are tend to do. And we were going at it, and he landed a punch in my right eye. And I remember in that moment, for just a few moments, I couldn't see anything out of that eye. For the few moments that I saw nothing but black, I was terrified. Not being able to see, being in the dark. Let me just say that I can't even imagine how it must be to live blind. I was scared. In fact, I couldn't remember a time in my life when I was more scared than that. The one thing that brought peace into my moment was sight. The moment the light began to penetrate the darkness, I was at peace again. I was still hurting. There was still going to be a knot. There was still going to be a bruise. But church, I was at peace because I could see. Amen? The light of the world brings peace into our troubled hearts, church. Right? One of my favorite parts of the passage that Kathy just read for us from Isaiah is the list of names for Jesus. Isaiah writes it like this. He says, he will be called Wonderful Counselor. He will be called Mighty God. He will be called Everlasting Father. But here is my favorite. He will be called the Prince of Peace. You see, Jesus is the author of peace. Jesus is the source of all peace. He's the great peacemaker. His life, His death, His sacrifice, all of it served to bring peace into a once chaotic world, right? Because before the light came, the darkness ruled. The darkness was reigning, and the darkness wreaked havoc in the lives of those who couldn't see. But light burst forth and calmed the raging storms. Light burst forth and made it possible for us to endure anything, so as long as we were looking toward the light. And that, my friends, brings peace. It brings peace that we can't even begin to comprehend. When we're surrounded by darkness, the light brings peace. I read a story this week of an elderly woman whose husband had just died, and she was preparing for her first Christmas alone. And several days before Christmas, she was snowed in by a brutal weather storm, and she was so depressed and she was so devastated that she just decided not to decorate for Christmas. She just didn't have the energy. And late in the afternoon, a couple of days before Christmas, a delivery boy came to her, made his way through the snow, and came up to the door and rang the doorbell. And when she answered, he asked her for a signature. And so she signed the paper, and she said, "Well, what's in the box?" And the young man laughed, and he opened up the flap, and inside was a little puppy, a golden Labrador retriever. And the delivery boy picked up the squirming little pup, and he exclaimed, "This is for you, ma'am." He's 6 weeks old, completely housebroken, and that young puppy began to wiggle in happiness at being released from captivity. "Who sent this?" the woman asked. The young man set the animal down and handed her an envelope and said, "It's all explained in this envelope, ma'am. The dog was bought last July when its mother was still pregnant, and it was meant to be a Christmas gift to you." The young man handed her a book, and in desperation she asked again, "Who sent me this puppy?" And as the young man turned to leave, he said, "Your husband, ma'am. Merry Christmas." She was shocked. But she opened the letter from her husband, and he had written it 3 weeks before he died. And he left it with the kennel owners to be delivered with the puppy as his last gift to her. The letter was full of love and encouragement and admonishments to be strong, and he vowed that he was waiting for the day when she was going to join him. He had sent her this young animal to keep her company until then. When the letter was over, she closed it up, and she wiped away the tears from her face and put the letter down. And then, remembering the little puppy at her feet, she picked up that little golden fur ball and grabbed him and held him close to her neck. And she looked out the window at the lights that outlined the neighbor's house. She heard the song, "Joy to the World, the Lord is come," come over the radio in the kitchen, and all of a sudden, she felt the most amazing peace she'd ever felt in her life. Her heart was filled with joy and a wonder greater than the grief and the loneliness that she was feeling. She squeezed that little puppy and she looked up in the sky with a smile on her face, and as quietly as she could muster, she called out, "Thank you." And with that, she and her newfound friend made their way to the basement to bring up the decorations for the day. This woman's world was filled with darkness. She was devastated. She was broken. She was depressed. She was lonely. But God has this strange way of sending a signal of light to remind us that light, even just a glimmer of light, church, is stronger than any darkness. Amen? That life is stronger than death. The good will overcome evil. Isaiah said it this way: the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. The prophet said, on those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. Church, the light of the world is here. He came first as a baby in a manger. He came back to life after death on a cross. And when he did, his light, his life, shattered the power of darkness forever. The darkness could not overcome it. For all who believed in him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. They are reborn. And church, here's the message. Because of his light breaking through the darkness, you and I can have new life. Amen? Christmas is all about the light. It's all about the light coming and us finding the light when he comes. Many of you came this morning because it's what you do on Sunday, or at least what you do on Christmas Eve. You come to church, right? Maybe some of you grew up that way. Maybe it's just become a tradition in your house. Some of you are here because you are sincerely searching for hope. You've had a tough year and you didn't know where else to go, and you heard maybe Christmas Eve, it's what people do. Maybe I'd check that out. Whatever brought you in the door this morning, the light came into darkness so that you could find exactly what your heart is aching for today. I don't know what hole you find yourself in this morning. I don't know what rubble you're underneath. I don't know what darkness or depression or fear or whatever you're facing, but I want to encourage you this morning. Keep your eye on the light. Keep your eye on the light of the world, because it's amazing how much light, hope light brings into our darkness.